Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for having me here. Sorry that I cannot be there in presence for you, but as you know, the election campaign has started already in Europe, and so I have to be on my way and on road. But maybe the same is true already for Britain, because you never really know when the general election will happen, do you? So, thank you very much for taking the time and coming together to discuss these very important subjects. I think it's very important to take a deeper and closer look into the situation of space policy. When I do that, a lot of people ask me, well, aren't there really any more important problems in the world? Well, my answer regularly is, nah, not really. The thing is, space has huge problems. Problems that are so big that a lot of people simply don't see them. They don't want to see them, or they simply don't understand them. And at the same time, if they are not solved, they will just amplify the problems that we here have on Earth. But at the same time, if we solve the problems in space, we can use space to solve the problems that we inherit and that we have at the moment on our planet. So, the challenges in space are, of course, space debris, and to find a level playing field so that we have a beneficial participation and privatization for all humankind. For that, in the end, we will need an international space law. I'm certain of this. But in order to get there, we first need a European EU space law, and so I'm very proud and honored that we finally make the next step and that the Commission is actively working on presenting a space law for Europe. This will be the first consecutive step in order to bring forward international space law that we dearly need. Why is it important to solve this? Well, I probably don't have to explain to you the importance of GPS, of Galileo, of Copernicus, of OneWeb or Starlink. All of this is very important, drastic space infrastructure that needs to be secured and safe in order for it to be used. If it's not, it is a danger for all of us. I think we all have to change our communication to make more clear that the Kessler syndrome, if it happens, has the potential to end the mankind that we know in our globalized society. This drasticality is, I believe, quite important so people better understand why it's relevant to talk about space policy. But, of course, space helps to solve the problems that we have here on ground. And one of the major ones, or no, the major one, the most important situation that we have on Earth is climate change. And space does help us to solve this issue. Of course, we know that 80% of the data we have in the IPCC report are coming from Copernicus and other satellites. So everything we know about climate change comes from space. It is for us impossible to understand and then defeat climate change if we don't have access to this data out of space. Copernicus is a huge help to indirectly solve climate change. And make no mistake, climate change remains the most important topic and the most important catastrophe that we need to talk and solve on the Earth, even further ahead than, for example, active wars like we have with Russia in Ukraine or in Gaza. Why? Because this entails not just the current generation, but also future generation, enables or is a reason for reduced resources and in the end also conflicts and wars. Therefore, we must act quickly to solve climate change. And so, I'm really happy that we're not just talking on how to understand and help solving it indirectly, but we're also discussing here today how to solve climate change or help solving climate change in a very direct way. Space-based solar power is such a direct way, and it is one to dare and to be very, very interested about. Space-based solar power means a huge construction out there in outer space that harnesses energy and beams it down on any part of the Earth for usage here for humankind. To be honest, space-based solar power sounds like science fiction. And it is. It is science fiction. It has some part of science, but at the moment we can only think about it, so therefore it's fiction. And I will also say, there's a lot of stuff that used to be science fiction. The moon landing was science fiction until we solved it, until the first person walked on the moon. And so I dearly believe space-based solar power is science fiction until it isn't anymore. And we have to figure out how to solve it. In times of the climate catastrophe, we have one thing not, that is time and the luxury to rule anything out. So I think it is important to realistically assess the possibilities and the risks of every technology, and especially of space-based solar power. So is it technically possible? Well, yes, we already do it on a very small scale nowadays. So it is technically possible, it's not unthinkable. Is it possible to scale up? That remains to be seen. To be honest, theoretically it is. We can size everything up, and we can parts of it already figure out today. Parts of the demonstrations have already shown that the energy transition in this capacity would be possible. Is it possible to ensure that the energy transition will also be going to work in a later stage in a bigger size? And especially, is it economically feasible to build all that up, even with all the losses of energy and with all the tendencies that happen there? To be honest, we don't completely know. Will it work in situ? Will it work really in orbit when we come to that phase? And this is also hard to discuss because I just mentioned space debris as one of the major issues of the space situation. And this is a construction that not just could distribute to also extend the problem of space debris, it will also suffer more and more from space debris because it is so large that even the smallest particle could damage it. So maybe even if it is possible to scale it up, it might not be possible to work in practice. A lot of question marks when it comes to space-based solar power, a lot of unanswered questions, no doubt. But every question mark is not a reason to give up. But in my understanding, a good reason to figure out what is going on and to figure out the answer to that question correctly. And why do that? Why invest all these money for studies, for research, for demonstrators? Why do all that? Because the potential is huge. The potential is not just to solve climate change. It will help us to produce energy and in such a way that it is steady, that it is stable, safe and sustainable, available all across the globe at any point of time. This is not just a huge help for our industries, but also a benefit for industries and economies throughout the world. And when it comes to climate change, I think it's also important to take into account not just our position, but those of the people living around the globe who steer and want to have a prosperous future as well. For them, this could be a potential that is huge. So the potential to help us with defeating climate change while at the same time tackling our ever-growing need for energy is huge. But there's also another one that I want to shed a light on. It is the potential that all of this is being done in Europe. Now, what do we require when it comes to this huge project? In order to build just one station of space-based solar power, we would need a fleet of the world's best rockets. Rockets that are cheap, available, fast, and clearly on target. To have this does not just benefit space-based solar power, but the privatization of space in general from a European standpoint. We would also need new efficiency jumps in satellites and in solar cells. Satellite technicalities to improve that does not just benefit the upstream market in the European stages, but also the solar cells are very important for every development that we do on Earth right now. So even if space-based solar power doesn't work, the improvements of solar cells would benefit us here on Earth so greatly that it's worth the while. We will also need unforeseen developments in robotics and autonomic building practices, fields that we've just touched barely upon, where we need in situ practices and that we could use really beneficial for works being here done on Earth. And lastly, one of the last point that I want to stress is it requires also unprecedented services of in-orbit services. A field where a lot of companies are thinking about at the moment, but nobody is really has a huge impact on it or found a way to bring it into practice. Here we could really show what it would mean and benefit for future exploration and situations. And if all of this is being done and dealt with, developed and produced in Europe, well, this is the beginning of a new economical and technological era in Europe. I truly believe it. And so we need not just see space-based solar power as a huge challenge, but as a huge possibility for Europe to expand and really become a leading role in the space race in the world. The moon landing enabled technological and economical advantages. You all know that Silicon Valley only came apart because of the moon landing. Well, I would say space-based solar power has the potential to enable a new technological and economical era in Europe. But the big difference is we don't just plant any flag on a big old rock. We use the technology to defeat climate change and bring energy throughout the world to make sure that everybody profiteers from that. I think this is a huge step forward, not just for Europe, but for mankind in general. So I ask you, how not to dare? Maybe space-based solar power is too expensive. Maybe it's impossible. Maybe it's too difficult, or maybe it's just too dangerous. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it works. And with the potential to defeat climate change and at the same time catapult us forward in technological and economical advantages, I say, let's dare to dream big. Let's try to figure out how this works and let's make it a successful story for the world. That is why it's important to bring together the smartest minds, not just to discuss outer space, but to discuss these great possibilities that we have with space-based solar power. And with that, I welcome you and I'm thanking you very much for coming together here today to figure out all of these very important topics. Thank you for joining the discussion and have a very fruitful and great day. I wish you all the best.